All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 8th meeting of the Planning Board. Hope everybody had happy holidays and everybody's back and ready to work in 2019. We'll start with the update from the Community Development Department. Hiram.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to stay here since it's difficult to get to that side. So Happy New Year. To first meeting of the year. We have a public hearing after this, which will be on an amendment to the Cambridge side special permit. Then we have several general business items today on the docket, election of planning board chair, and then a series of design updates. So for, excuse me, on the northwestern side of the city in Alewife, 95 Fawcett Street, and then on the northeastern side at North Point, Cambridge Crossing, parcels G, H, and W. Our next meeting will be January 22nd. We have many public hearings that day. So we will have a special permit hearing for 14 to 16 Jackson Street, and then we have 3 hearings for rezoning petitions. There is a zoning petition for 234 Monsignor O'Brien Highway, which is, excuse me, change in the zoning from residence C1 to business A for that district. We have a second zoning petition that is revisiting of the flat roof proposal from some time ago. This version talks about converting the ability to convert flat and concave roofs to either greenhouses or glass porches. And finally, a zoning petition hearing for an amendment to expand the accessory apartment provisions in the ordinance. The next meeting will be January 29th, which will also have a zoning petition hearing for the Alexandria proposal for the Met Pipe site and the Grand Junction overlay related to that. And when we go look at the Ordinance Committee hearings for those same petitions, on January 15th, which is next Tuesday, the Ordinance Committee will hold its hearing on the 234 Monsignor O'Brien Highway petition. On Wednesday, January 30th at 5:30, the Alexandria petition. And then Tuesday, February 5th, will be 2 petition hearings at 1 o'clock, the flat roof rezoning, and at 3 o'clock, the accessory apartment rezoning. And the one other thing that the board might be interested in at Ordinance Committee, this week, Wednesday, January 9th at 5:30, there is an Ordinance Committee hearing that looks at expanding the provisions of the tree protection ordinance. This is some of the recommendations that are emerging from the Urban Forestry Master Plan Task Force's work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any transcripts? No. Okay. So then we will now go to the election of the Planning Board Chair, which takes place on the first meeting of every new year. And this would be for the year 2019, effective as of the close of this meeting. I have been chair for a number of years, and I think it is time for someone else to take over the job. And open it up to nominations. Tom?
I would nominate Catherine to be the next chair.
I would happy to second that. Is there any other nominations? If not, then all those in favor of Catherine becoming our next chair? It's unanimous. I'm very happy for you. And now nominations for vice chair. Any nominations?
Well, you
Nominate
don't.
Ted?
Yeah, you don't get off that easy. Nominate Ted.
Is there a second? Are there any other nominations? We have a vote to elect me to be vice chair for the year 2019. Well, thank you. I would like to take the opportunity at this time to thank everyone in the CDD staff for, all the hard work and all the hard lifting they have done during my time as chair. It is a job that couldn't be done without the terrific staff that we have, and everybody has just been great, and I really, truly appreciate it. So thank you very much. And I look forward to Catherine taking over. So now we have a public hearing. This is the second public hearing with regard to Planning Board case number 66 relating to Cambridge side. It's a major amendment to the Planned Unit Development Special Permit sought by Cambridge Side Galleria Associates Trust to modify the previously approved final development plan to re-tenant Summerall of the approximately 140,000 square feet of third-floor retail space in the Core Mall building to general office use with no external changes to the building footprint. And this is pursuant to Section 12.37, Amendments to Plan Unit Development Special Permit, and a Section 19.20 Project Review Special Permit. This had been a previous hearing at our last meeting in which we approved the concept and moved things forward to the provision of a final development plan. And whomever is going to start.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let's make a quick change to the agenda. My name is John Tuig from New England Development. To my left, Dave Manfredi from Elkus Manfredi, Rich McKinnon. Also to my left and behind me is Tim Sullivan from Goulston Stores. As the chair mentioned, we were here in December on the 18th, where the board was kind enough to support the preliminary determination. Since that time, we did receive 3 comment letters. One was from the DPW. One were some design comments, and then also from transportation. We had the opportunity in the first week in January to meet with everyone, which we appreciate people doing. We were actually here the day after New Year's, and everybody was mostly awake and ready, and we had some good discussions. And I'll just very briefly respond to 3 things. The DPW letter inquired about Chapter 91 and whether we had received a Chapter 91 approval. Actually, we did. On December 17th, Chapter 91, DEP issued a letter saying that this was a minor modification and no further action was required. So we did receive that. It was dated on the 17th. Actually, they issued it the day before we had a meeting. We just hadn't received it yet. On transportation, and I believe the board has received which focused mostly on transportation demand management issues. We reviewed those comments. With transportation, we have no issues. Those comments are acceptable and will initiate the various matters that are set forth in the letter. Thirdly, there were 2 other requests, one to deal with some design issues and see if we could maybe relook at the facade. We asked David to come tonight to show you that. We made some changes, which we think actually make it better, and we're very pleased with those. I think comments from staff were very helpful. And then there was a request that we have some development data update, which is really just how does the 140,000 square feet fit into the square footages that were in the original permit. So David's going to show you a chart with that. And then David, as I said, will have a brief presentation, and then Rich is going to make a few closing remarks. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll introduce Dave Manfredi.
Good evening. Thank you, John. David Manfredi from Elkus Manfredi Architects. As John indicated, we have had several meetings now with CDD, most recently on January 2nd. We have received comments, and on the right of the screen are the written comments from CDD, and I will just paraphrase them very quickly. And they really are related to two things. One, the improvements on the exterior of the building related to the new facade for the potential office space on the third floor, and the second is with regard to landscape material on Cambridge Side Place. And they really have to do, and I'm going to try to do this so that I can point and stay with the microphone. This is what will be our front door to approximately 140,000 square feet of office on the third floor of the building. It is today, you can see there's 3 doors. It's an egress corridor from the mall. If you went through those 3 doors, which you can't because there's no hardware on the outside, you'd find an egress corridor and a service elevator. We are replacing the service elevator with 2 pedestrian elevators. Our lobby is really very small. It's about 10 feet wide, and on the other end of it, it's about 20 feet long. That is perpendicular to the street, and on the end of it is another 3 doors, and they lead to an egress stair that goes up to the third floor. We're quite restrained in footprint here because of the existing Cheesecake Factory tenant. But in actuality, if you look at what we're all trying to accomplish in terms of making better streets, we're making office building lobbies smaller and smaller. Office building lobbies tend to go dead at night. And so here we're constrained and we're embracing the constraint. And our goal is create identity and address for the third floor. Comments from CDD had to do with, number one, how we resolve the geometries. What I mean by that is, as we had originally shown this, and I think you saw this when we were here back in December, we created a kind of new frame right here, and we brought it all the way up to the underside of that structure. This structure is real. These are, what I mean by that is it's actually doing work. It's bracing the curtain wall on the third floor. And what happens here today, and I can't exactly tell you why, but there's a beam here, and that beam transfers that load over here. So that's where the column is, and that's where the column is. And that's what we had taken as our storefront or office front. And we had cut through this belt course. CDD pointed out that we left kind of unresolved just the visual sense of how that load comes to the ground. Not that it has anything to do with the actual structure of the building, what we had proposed, but visually was unresolved. And so I'll show you our thoughts about that. The second point they made was that they wanted to be sure that with this insertion of a new kind of storefront, we didn't make the surrounding brick look paper thin. And of course, we're quite restrained in depth. We can't come out. We don't really want to come out, but we can't come out. We have to be at least flush, if not recessive. What you will see, and this is very hard to see in these photographs, but if you went out there, you would see, these are actually pilasters. The brick in the vertical is forward of the brick in the horizontal. And you'll see how that inspired a change. Their third comment has to do with the glazing, and you'll remember we have eliminated this spandrel. We have glazed this opening, and they asked about how we would provide sun control, and I'll show you a solution for that. And then lastly is, there was a comment about spandrel glass, and I think that was just a misunderstanding in the drawings. There never was a proposal for spandrel glass. It's all clear glass. It's all vision glass. And then the last thing is, and you can see it here, the kind of state of landscape, and I'll explain what we propose to do. And so we believe that there's an opportunity, given this belt course, to allow those loads to land on that belt course, to make our storefront or office front a little bit lower and sit within that frame rather than try to go all the way up here. And so you visually kind of resolve how these loads are coming down and coming down to the ground. We also think there's some opportunities to pick up a few datum lines, horizontal lines from the surround. You'll see that we're proposing a kind of marquee that will identify the address for the building. and then lastly, some thoughts about how to detail that brick. And so this is the revised elevation. And what we are proposing is that we're basically creating a new opening that will be 2 stories tall. It will sit under that, what I'm calling a belt course or a spandrel, so that those pipe columns actually have a place to go and bring that load to either side visually. We're not changing that steel. It's more of a visual sense of resolution. We've also having come to realize, and you can kind of see that shadow line right there. You can see that brick is proud of that brick. That's gave us the opportunity to say, okay, let's push this back. We want this to have depth. This is plate metal, and we want it to have some depth. And so we pushed it back into the recess plane of the brick. And so there will be a return of brick, a kind of reveal on these edges, a return of the brick that just exposes the depth of the brick. It's not a great deal, but it does show that it's real brick. And we have picked up these horizontal lines, which is really very subtle, but just connects to the surrounding building. This is a 2-story space. You walk into that lobby, there's a 2-story space approximately 10 feet deep, and then it drops down to a 1-story space. You can kind of see the elevator hoistway doors beyond. This is all clear glass, Volvision glass. There is no spandrel glass here. We do propose a marquee, which is a projection off the face of the building. The intent there is to put the address of the building. We don't have an address yet. And so that's why you're not seeing anything here. That address may be something like 10 Cambridge Side Place, and probably just ends up with a 10 or a 10 Cambridge Side as pin letters on the outside edge of that marquee. We just don't have an address yet. And so that gives us the frame. It gives us our edge detail. It gives us the division of lights in this big area of glass. And then the next thing is the glass. And what we would propose to do, and I don't propose this as the exact final resolution of the pattern, but that we would do this as a frit on the glass. And what I mean by that is not applied but baked, meaning that it's a painted surface, probably the third surface of an insulating glass panel that will be, it could be horizontal lines, it could be a pattern of squares or circles, but gives us some sun control and gives us some pattern here with the idea that it gets more dense as it goes up. There is a internal plane, as I say, about 10 feet back that's 2 stories tall. And so we expect that, and you can kind of see it here, that there will be some pendant kind of lights in that space. And then there's a very, very small reception desk beyond. I'll move on to the landscape, and this is really a hard problem. And we're working with Carol Johnson's office on solutions here. The constraint is simply this. And I'm going to go to a plan. Oops, I thought I had a plan. There were a series of planters when the mall was built. The reason they're planters above grade is because the parking garage extends out beyond the perimeter of the building. And so there's no opportunity to put trees in the ground. There was approximately, I'm going to say there was 12 planters on the building side of the street. There was another 6 planters in the median. They're all like this. If you went out there today, you'd see about half of those trees have died, and those planters are empty. Our proposal is replace the planters, replace the planting, something more robust, bigger, give them the opportunity to flourish. We really can't go into the ground. There may be, at some point in time, a longer-term solution which has to do with the kind of rethinking of the entire street. And what we really need is to create wider sidewalks somehow over time. But our proposal now is to put new plant material in, probably new planters, as big and robust as we can, and replace everything that has died, and probably replace everything. Even some of the ones that are living are not that prosperous, so we'll replace those as well. This is the chart that John referred to. This is what we talked about back in December. It's really very simple. We're really proposing that approximately 140,000 square feet, the third floor of the mall, can become office space. It may not all become office space. There may be some retail that's retained on the third floor. But over time, what this allows us to do is basically to reduce the amount of retail by 140,000 square feet, increase the amount of overall office by approximately 140,000 square feet. That is the space that's available on the third floor. And I thought I had one more. I do. Specific question and maybe just a little bit of clarification. The existing third floor looks like this. You all know the arcade. There's escalators on both ends, and then there's a walkway around the atrium that runs 3 stories through. And those are the demising lines that exist today as the stores exist today. What we envision over time is that when the entire third floor, if the entire third floor becomes office space, that's the little lobby I'm talking about. Those are the 2 elevators. You would arrive on the third floor. Reception would be here. This could be multi-tenanted space. And so that walkway would remain basically as is. Obviously, all the storefronts would go away. We may redo the floor in that arcade. This would be glazed in some way because we want to get as much borrowed light out of that existing skylight as possible. But this could be a single tenant, this could be 2 tenants, it could be 4 tenants, it could be 6 tenants. And so how that circulation actually gets resolved over time, meaning how much that you could imagine a resolution in which we only have circulation here, the access to skylight remains, but it's a tenanting condition. And so that's why we show you that, that over time, obviously all of the first floor and the second floor remain as they are, and the third floor will get resolved as the tenanting gets resolved. And with that, I'll go back here and introduce Rich.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Rich McKinnon. I live at 1 Layton Street in Cambridge, and I just want to close by going over a couple of matters. I find if I have some notes, I don't forget to commit the unforgivable sin of talking too long here at the microphone. You guys may remember that over the last 3 years, I've been before the board with Izzy Shade from New England Development to talk about different ways that we've undertaken to modernize the mall, which had gotten pretty tired and which at the same time was running into new competition from the internet. And the first thing we did was come before the board, mainly because we consider our ground floor is a public street, really, connecting the canal and Charles Park. We decided we would do a major renovation of the entire mall. We did it while keeping all of the stores open by doing the renovation on the graveyard shift. And we got your support and the support of our neighbors to go ahead and do that. Once we had done that, it became clear that we had an old-looking building on the outside leading to something very new on the inside. So we tried to settle that up, meeting with our neighbors again in East Cambridge for quite a while on this subject, and that was how to change the signage, how to change the lighting on the outside so that it was simplified and it didn't look like what in fact it was, and that's a series of signs that it sort of, by tenant, hodgepodged its way over the years, and it had old, very inefficient lighting. So that you were good enough to give us your support to do. The third and final thing, and I won't repeat, you know that we've been having struggles on the third floor. You know that Sears closed a year earlier than we thought. So stabilizing the third floor is terribly important. And that's the reason that we're here tonight. It's an important request for us to be able to stop the difficult tendency that we've had up there. I just want to close by mentioning something that John had as part of his cover letter, and that is that as we've been doing this, we've also been looking, we've been here 30 years, and we've been looking at longer-term plans. We know that we got caught off guard during the last 30. We figure there'll be surprises in store for the next 30 years. And so we've been meeting with the city manager first, department heads, the elected officials, our neighbors, to try and get ideas to, very good ideas have been generated by these conversations. We think we're finally ready to bring this in front of the Cambridge Planning Board. There are just some sign-offs we need and we've almost got, but it's our hope that we'll be back here as early as March talking about those plans as well. So that concludes our presentation, and we thank you very much, and we do ask respectfully for your vote on the third floor. Thanks.
Thank you. Do board members have any questions right now? I have a couple, actually. What is, and can you go back to the plan showing the third floor? So what is the actual square footage?
Approximately 140,000 square feet.
Okay. Because there was a comment in the letter with this application about ongoing review by the planning board in the event there was office space in excess of 140,000. And could you clarify what that statement was about?
I think it's simply the question of whether the 140,000 included the circulation, meaning including that. And the 140,000 does include that.
140,000
That's what the question was.
does include that?
Yes.
Okay. And now, if you, I know it all depends on what your tenant situation ends up, but do you envision the possibility that there would be no public access, no public use of the third floor in certain circumstances where you may have one tenant that took the entire floor?
Yes, I would say it's comparable to an office building. Public access meaning public access to a lobby, but there is possible that it could be a single tenant, that circulation space becomes part of the tenant space, and that it would enjoy all the same kind of benefits that office space, meaning privacy and limited access, would enjoy.
But the circulation area is part of the 140,000?
It is.
Okay. Okay, fine. Did anyone else have any questions?
Until you fully tenant it out, will there be access to the third floor from the mall itself? Do you expect that to be maintained?
We expect you to be able to still come up to third floor, escalators, where we're going to go as far as the tenants who are there over time. And whether it will be partly still a retail space and partly office is really totally tenant-driven, and we're having some discussions with people who are interested. But as far as how it's going to, as David said, is it possible it could be one tenant? Yes. Could it be two? Could it be seven? Could it be half retail and half office? Yes, all the above.
The idea was it would take a little bit of pressure off your rather small entrance in the your new entrance.
We'll say in that entrance, though, I mean, our sense, and we mentioned it in December, is the people who actually work here, they're going to come in the main entrance. They're going to come in through the food court and come up through the escalators they do today, grab a coffee and come in. our sense was we had to have some type of a, if you've ever been to that space and you're going there to the third floor, so, oh, where do I go? Oh, it's 10 Cambridge Side, go there, Cambridge Side Place. That's why we want to create it. We think it's really going to be a visitor entrance more than it is a functional entrance for people who work there every day. So.
Okay, then let's go to public comment. I don't know, is there a sign-up sheet? No, it's not. Is there anyone who wishes to speak about this project, this proposal? None appearing. Then board members, other questions, comments? Joe, I see you and Adam are here. We've received your memorandum. Is there anything you wanted to add to that this evening? No. Okay, well, the one question I have, you indicate in the memorandum that all the traffic and parking and transportation matters have been agreed to by the proponent, and could you please go on record and indicate that indeed you have agreed to them all?
Yes, we actually reviewed the memo from Mr. Barr, the various TDM measures, repaving, some other improvements. We agree with all of them. We can implement them as part of this project.
Okay. Joe, is there anything you wish to add? No? Okay. We have your memo. We had Adam last hearing. Board members, any other questions, any comments? People are satisfied with the revisions. Susanna, we received CDD's memo. Do you have any further comments you wish to make? Okay.
We are comfortable with the changes, and we're sort of pleased to see the sort of refinements and the detail that's been added in, and we understand the response to the landscaping as well, so we look forward to working with the applicant on the changes.
Okay. Okay, so if not, are we ready to go forward? Hugh, question or comment?
A comment, I guess. So the city has been working with Rich and with Steve Karp for 30 years on this project. And it's clearly a tremendous asset to the city to have a place that has all of these stores, all these opportunities. And if it turns out that there isn't enough business to keep 3 floors in business, well, 2 floors will be good. Yeah, I used to go up to the Macy's Home Store, and as I was checking this out, I actually went into the Gap because everything was on sale, because apparently they're moving out. And I should have worn my Gap pants because they're really cool. And they were so. There's a long history here of working together, and the current proposal makes sense for the where retail is today, and it's constantly changing, and we'll keep working, and I hope we'll be able to keep working with Rich and with Steve for maybe not 30 years, but so I'm in full support of this, and I hope we can favorably act on it.
I guess I have one comment also, that I think you got a great idea, done well. I think it'll work very well. It's close to the T, the mall's there, parking's there. I think it's a great proposal. I think good luck with it and continue.
Okay, well, what we are called upon to do today is to determined that we approve the application for special permit, and that if we determine that the final development plan, make a determination that it meets the evaluation criteria set forth in section 12.35.3 and contains any revisions to the development proposal required by the planning board. We had a couple of comments and questions that have been responded to this evening. And in the filings, we made extensive findings with regard to the preliminary determination that's been filed. Very briefly, I can summarize them that they conform to the general development controls set forth in section 12.50 and the development controls for the specific PUD district in which it's located, conforms with the adopted policy plans or development guidelines for that portion of the city, provides benefits to the city that outweigh its adverse effects, which we consider the quality of site design, traffic flow and safety, adequacy of utilities and other public works, impact on existing public facilities within the city, and the potential fiscal impact. We've reviewed all of those in detail at the last meeting. They are set forth in the preliminary determination. Are people comfortable with simply adopting what has previously been discussed and put in writing? Okay. Assuming we grant the special permit, the conditions certainly would be that the usual conditions with regard to ongoing review by CDD, any conditions, applicable conditions from the DPW, the traffic mitigation and transportation program, and all the other matters set forth in Transportation and Parking's most recent memorandum. Jeff, is there anything else?
I was just nodding. I don't believe there's anything else to be considered for this one. I think that we covered everything in our first memo.
And any condition that in the first memo that were not responded to would end up as a condition in here. And then simultaneously, we would grant the special permit only if we find that it's consistent with the urban design objectives set forth in section 19.30. Again, we reviewed them last time, but again, since there is no changes to the exterior of the building other than the entrance lobby, I think we were all in agreement that it complied with those. So could I have a motion to grant the special permit as a major amendment to the PUD in accordance with section 12.35 and in accordance with the project review special permit in section 19.225 and subject to the findings that we've made in the previous determination and readopted to this evening, and subject to the conditions that we've just discussed.
No move.
Second. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Good luck to you all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That was our only public hearing for this evening. We do have a number of matters relating to ongoing design review. And
I know you could do this all by yourself, Brian, but I think it's always good to ask.
there. So the first matter of the general business relates to Planning Board number 309, 95 Fawcett Street. Who is... Swathi, there's something that's pulsing. Is there? Is it? Okay, please.
This is fun. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Attorney Joe Hanley from McDermott, Quilty & Miller in Boston. I represent Ed Doherty, the development team for this matter on Fawcett Street. David O'Sullivan, who is with me and has plans and a presentation to show you with respect to some design updates. Just to give you some background, I had sent a letter dated November 8th to CDD outlining the reason why we're here and the need for these minor modifications to this approved project. This is a residential development that received approvals for a special permit and a variance from the city, from the planning board and the zoning board in the summer of 2016. Permit was then issued in March of 2017, and Mr. Doherty commenced construction, and it was revealed that there was a surveyor's omission with respect to the city's existing utility easement on a portion of the property. And so we've spent the last year and a half working with the city solicitor and the city engineer and our abutter and the MBTA on two different options that we had proposed to relocate the city infrastructure in a way that would allow the approved project to go forward in its original form. Regrettably, because of the many parties involved, we were not able to get on the same page with the MBTA for the release. But we do thank the solicitor and Kathy Watkins from engineering for helping us with this, and we've spent a lot of time in it. So we do not come here for this minor modification without having exhausted every other avenue. Having said that, it is a somewhat minor request in the sense of we are not expanding the envelope or the building. In fact, it's a bit of a reduction, and the relief that we are granted, we're not extending. In fact, it's a little bit less, same amount of units, same amount of affordability, same amount of parking. So thank you for the opportunity to come back, and I'll ask David to take you through the design changes.
Basically what the easement kind of affected the corner of the building at the turn of Fawcett Street. And I think you all have plans, so I didn't bother with the plans here, but I can bring them up if anybody has questions. So this is the facade that is least affected. It really doesn't have any change on it. The only changes you see on the facade are things we worked out with Susanna after the planning board approved it for final design review. This is the side that faces the parking lot behind. It's kind of opposite Fawcett Street. The upper one is what was approved. The lower one, as you see over on the far left side of it, is where the pullback of the building is. So we actually ended up with more open space on the very corner of the building, the curve of Fawcett Street. So that the whole facade is pretty much the same till you get way over to this far side over here. This facade is kind of the end little piece, and it's really basically unchanged there. A little bit different window pattern. The next one, this is the Fawcett Street side, so the main building entrance stays the same, and over at the garage door, you can kind of see where the reduction in the corner of the building is now cut off. So that end of the building is what got shortened the most from things. So that basically our variance was for the two pieces of the building closest to Fawcett going from 15 feet variance. So we actually reduced the amount of frontage on the road that's closer to the road, which is what Joe was talking about as far as, really making the variance even less. And we did maintain the same height, same massing. Going to the next one, this is kind of wrapping the corner. We still have the roof deck, still have the facade, pretty much this. You can see the extra green, by seeing the blue on the end, you can see where the building got reduced down. From inside the courtyard, there's really no change. These are kind of the 3D renderings. Part of the changes here are things we worked out with Susanna on the storefront and things like that. But the lower pair on the left is the original, and on the right, you can see that it's not really changed much at all. It doesn't show it, but it is pulled back some. This view across the top, not really. And then kind of on the bottom pair, you can kind of see where the end of the building was cut off, and that's where the roof deck got reduced in size. But we still have a fairly substantial roof deck for the amenity for the owners, and in the same basic location. And these are farther away renderings, but you can't really see it. At this point, you really don't even notice the scale change or the differences. But these are ones we put in the original submission, so we wanted to tell you what it is. So that's about wraps up what I had to say, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Any questions, comments, concern? Hugh?
I think it's at least as good as it was before, maybe better.
Yeah. I do like the way the roof line continues.
Yeah, I came away with the same. It actually looks better.
Here with the way the area around the garage door and that little end came kind of wrapped better than the original one. So actually cutting that back a little bit helped. And it gave us a little extra landscape space on the corner too.
So Jeff, what do you need from us?
So this is, well, now it's really loud. This is being brought forward as a design update. So it's something that we do from time to time for projects where this is officially in the continuing design review process. In fact, it's actually in kind of a funny place because they received a building permit and now need to make some modifications and kind of go through that process again and start over with the adjustments being made. So, but anyway, this is in the continuing review stage, and so there are changes that there are changes to the design. We thought it was appropriate to come to the planning board to get feedback on the finding that it remains in substantial conformance with the original approval. I think that they've described the circumstances of this project, which are unusual, So, if the board has any comment to guide us in making that sort of continuing review determination, we would appreciate that. But otherwise, we can move forward with that determination.
Well, I guess then we could take a vote that this, the plans that will continue to be subject to ongoing review with staff, but these plans are in substantial conformance with the vote that was taken in 2016 and the special permit that was granted at that time. Is that motion?
So moved.
A second? All those in favor? Again? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck. Okay. You're departing. What? Need 5 minutes? Yeah. Why don't we take a 5-minute break right now, and then we'll come back, and we have more design review matters with regard to Okay, we're back, and now in general business matters, we have design updates with regard to Planning Board number 179, Cambridge Crossing, formerly known as North Point, parcels G, H, and W. So if you'd like to start.
Great, thank you. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm Director of Development for DivCo West. And with me here tonight is our legal team. We also have Robert Brown, of the architect for Parcel G, Alex Krieger, the architect for Parcel H, and Mark Eclipse, the architect for Parcel W. And we have Chris Matthews, landscape architect for all 3 parcels, as well as Jesse Barricon of Graffito, and Nicole Labossiere and John Rappaport from DivCo West. So I want to start tonight by thanking the board and CDD staff for your comments and your memos, particularly those comments we received at the last November board meeting. You'll see tonight we have changed our designs based on the feedback we received, particularly at the November board meeting, and we think the buildings are better for those comments. We have received staff memos commenting on the submissions for tonight's hearing, and we have submitted matrices with responses to every point in those memos, and those are the hard copies that we've distributed now. There are also electronic copies that have been sent in as well. Now, some of the responses to the latest staff memo include drawings that we've prepared after receiving the staff memos, and these will be presented by each architect at the end of their presentation. And the staff memos were generally supportive and identify topics of ongoing review, and I'll discuss each of those ongoing review topics at the end of each parcel presentation. And so we're here tonight to request final design review approval of parcels G, H, and W, and to ask the planning board to issue findings on parcels G and H. And you'll recall that parcels G and H are partially in Boston and in Cambridge. The special permit stipulates that the planning board issue a finding that the proposed building have been approved in Boston on each of these parcels. And I can tell you Divco West has received these approvals in Boston and provided all the required documentation to city staff. Buildings on parcels H and W are slightly larger than when they last received design review approval by the Cambridge Planning Board. The special permit stipulates that the board will approve the final gross floor area, and so that is another request for this evening to approve the final gross floor area of parcels H and W since they've grown slightly. And then the special permit also requires that we continually update the Appendix 1 that lists all the gross floor areas by parcel and city and phase, and we have done so and reviewed that with city staff, and we ask tonight for your approval of that update as well. And I note that the appendix contains some typos, which we have since corrected and submitted a corrected version to city staff. So unless there's any other general questions, I'll turn it over to Alex Krieger to present Parcel H.
Thank you. My name is Alex Krieger, a design principal at NBBJ, and we are the architects for Parcel H. And let me say we've worked extremely hard since our last meeting with you and hope to demonstrate that all the changes and adjustments that we've made are going to show you the building that you so much approved and enjoyed back a year ago, except for a few cases where it's gotten better. And we have Susanna and her staff to thank for that. We've worked very arduously with her since November on a number of items, as I will describe. Obviously, by now you know which is H, and then G. Robert will follow me with G, which is next door. And we've worked very closely together throughout the process on these buildings. So if our memories are correct, these were 5 major issues. There have been other asks and comments made, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation, but these are 5 major issues that you had raised, sometimes because you hoped we would improve, and sometimes because you hoped we would return to what you had remembered seeing a year earlier. So the screening of the penthouse, the patterning of the facade, the location, prominence of the public elevator, both at the lower level at Doss Street, of course at the upper level at the bridge level, of course the position of the lobby retail, and then lastly, thanks I think to some of you, Lou and Hugh and others, about the location of the bicycle parking, how you get in and out of the bicycle parking, where it is. So I'll address each one of them individually. We have spent a great deal of time making sure that all of the equipment, and there's a lot of equipment on such buildings, would be made invisible. We have done a number of things. We have raised the perimeter parapet quite considerably. We have lowered as much as we possibly could the height of the mechanical enclosures themselves. We actually went to the extreme of dropping the roof slab slightly to lower the equipment further. And if I can turn to this diagram, it might be clear. So again, the up arrow suggests where we raised the parapet, especially towards that northeast corner, which I think you were quite favorable disposed towards. What we refer to, and it really is the kind of sort of the prow of the Cambridge Crossing ship as it faces Boston. And then the down arrows show you that we have then reduced the height of the mechanical penthouse enclosures, and indeed also sort of dropped the roof slab slightly in order to achieve an additional reduction. And then as you will see in both projects, and these may be slightly abstract, but we hope you understand what we're trying to show. The little dot there is the, whoops, sorry. Yes, the little dot there is our building, and obviously it's a little bit bigger than that, bigger than it seems in. And make the oh sorry, okay, that's our building, and what we're showing is the distance that you have to be away from the building in these various spots on the Cambridge Crossing site before you see any even hint of any mechanical equipment. You have to be more than 1,000 feet away, as you can follow, of course, C being right there, right? More than 1,100 feet away, and so forth, 3,000 feet away along the B axis here. So you will simply not see any mechanical equipment unless you are in one of the upper stories of adjacent buildings or perhaps in a drone flying nearby. So I can, if you would like more specificity, I can sort of take you through the various station points and so forth, but that may slow us down a little bit unless you have questions about that. So again, we've done, and you will see this also with Project G, how carefully we have, to the extent humanly and scientifically possible, to absolutely make the mechanical equipment disappear. So again, you can see from the Gilmore Bridge, more or less way back near the Bunker Hill College, you see that you will not see anything actually in either building, although I'll leave Robert to G. You also see, I think what you had encouraged us to return to, we had slightly dropped the angle of the parapet as it moved from sort of west to east, and you can see it's become taller to mask the mechanical equipment, but also a little bit more prominent at that northeast corner as well. So this is the facade also that, whoops, yeah. So this is the facade that you saw back a year ago, more than a year, 1917. When some of us were around, when some of us were young and ambitious, 2017. We had in November we made a kind of a tactical mistake. We did not show you the comparable illustration. We showed you an actual facade, and I think it may have confused probably us and you because it looked like we made a substantial number of changes in the way in which the patterning shifted. So if we can show you, whoa, there's a thing missing. Yes. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself or behind myself. So this was also to show you that as you stand towards the back of Cambridge Crossing, you also do not see any of the mechanical equipment as well. I apologize. So now here, this is the facade that you saw in 2017, in October 2017, which you approved. And you can also see, yes, it's now clear to me too, the kind of exaggerated profile of the parapet as it moves towards the northeast corner. Now if I go forward, this is the facade that we are showing you. So it is essentially identical. The differences are extremely minor in terms of just the very development of the curtain wall system and the proportion of glazing to solid surfaces. But if I go back and forth, you see that although it is a different rendering, the facade is just as it was. And what you saw in November was a facade that looked a little, as a flat drawing, it looked more sort of articulated and more kinetic. So we are returning back to what you had approved, and you had sort of complimented us on that approval. This is, perhaps to recall your memory, this is a detailing of the curtain wall system. It is made out of a number of panels of different proportion between glazing and solid. And if you would like, we can show you the various materials that are exactly as they were back in 1917, again, if I can say that, 2017. And so the way in which we composed the facade was that some of the areas that have the greatest amount of glass are those that are less prone to get a lot of solar exposure. Some of the ones that have less glass and more solidity are on the south side, which has the greatest access to light and so forth. So while it is not completely organized along that concept. It suggests that concept in order also to create a facade that is not either entirely horizontally proportioned or entirely vertically proportioned, but has this sort of what we'd like about it, and we thought you would do this kind of kinetic quality about it. So again, this is just to remind you that we are here just as we were in 2017, and the materials are exactly as we showed you. I can lift the material up if you would like, but or you can come and look at it a little later, just as you saw before. All right. So again, you can see that in this case, you see the kind of the variety in the panels, and the solid part, the metal part, kind of angles outward. And because of the different in each shape, the angle is slightly different as a result, and therefore you'll get over the course of the day and over the course of the season, slightly different reflections of light as you move around the building and so forth. And that's one of the things we hoped you would enjoy, or Citizens of Cambridge would enjoy. All right, the public elevator obviously is very important because there may be times when, of course, people cannot go through the building and maybe not want to and so forth. So this is a diagram which we hope clarifies the pathway from the Gilmore Bridge along an arcade, which you will see in a second, along the arcade, along the Gilmore Bridge, along quite a widened and landscaped sidewalk. And as it turns the corner along the southern face of our building, also in an arcade. And the box in red, it won't literally be in red, the box, but there'll be a canopy that will be red, is the public elevator. It's also adjacent to the two garage elevators. And so if you were coming, let us say, from Bunker Hill, you would catch that elevator up there, and then you would descend down and get out in the lower level, or vice versa. Now, we've made that whole sequence more prominent at your suggestion, and again, work with the design review staff. And I hope this is not too confusing. So on the left, this is what you approved. What we showed you in November was actually a bit better still, a widened corridor leading to the elevator, that red elevator, and a slightly more prominent point of entry to it. And what we've done since is improved it still. And I would point out, if I could turn. Whoa, I keep doing that. I apologize. Maybe I should turn this way. So you can see the door. You can see that the location of the door. This was a narrow door at first. This became a wider, a 6-foot door. And here we sort of we angled it out further and towards the plaza and towards the intersection. So there's no mistaking about where it is. You'll see in a second. We've widened the corridor further as well, and you will be able to have a very easy way to get in and out of the lobby, or stay in that lobby. It'll also be a way to get your bicycles inside, but then I'll get to that in a second. So in each case, I think we've made that much more prominent. And again, thanks to some of you, and thanks to Susanna and her staff as well. All right, so you can see again the view from our plaza at the intersection of Dawes and Childs, of the lobby. To remind you that the reason the lobby is so tall is that there's a 24-foot difference between the Dawes Street level and the Gilmore Bridge level, and so there's a lower lobby that most people would come into as pedestrians, or an upper lobby as well. Now, what you see are two areas of red. And this we do mean to be red, unless you insist that we make it orange, but that was one of the questions that came, perhaps we'll address later. And those are to signify, and there's a sign, and you can see the sign here that says public elevator, and there'll be a similar sign up there, and so that's to indicate that this is where you can come without interfering the building at all. So you come in, you can see it's quite frontal to you, at least from the intersection, and then the color, again, is to connect those two elevations in those two places for public access. And both the elevator and the areas there are large enough to also be able to put your bike in there if you do not want to carry it down the stairs as well. You can also see, and we'll get to that again in a second, that to the left of the red, that area is the front door, which is a revolving door. And further to the left, and we'll get to that in a second, are pivot doors, which will open up and allow the cafeteria to expand out to the outside during fair weather. All right, so just to emphasize the sense of connectivity, we're back at the Gilmore Bridge. And again, to remind you, if you look up above, up there, right, we are greatly expanding by pulling our building back, greatly expanding that sidewalk, which at the moment is pretty miserable. I'm sure you all know that. We're adding landscaping. I don't know whether Chris wants to say something about that at this point. You're going to walk along this arcade, and there's a kind of decorative railing, which is also red, or perhaps orange, and that will sort of begin to kind of signal you to move along. Chris, would you like to say something about the trees there?
Perhaps when we get into
Okay, yes. And then, so you'll move along the side of the building. Then you will, this is just a detail of the arcade. Along that side, the arcade is quite tall. It's 2 stories tall. You can see a little red railing as well. And then as it turns the corner, that red railing continues, the arcade continues, but actually the scale of it drops down a little bit, as we think is sort of appropriate as you come closer to the entry. And then in the distance, at least from this vantage point, you will see again that sort of red, the red canopy. This is the one that says public elevator, and then it's also where, of course, the upper lobby entrance is, and then that's the place that projects out where the both the public elevator and the garage elevators are located. And I think with the next one, yes.
Yeah, yeah, so just off to the left side of this image is the existing Murphy stairs. So the existing Murphy stairs, we're going to improve the planting, we're going to replant the stairs, but the stairs stay in place. And then we're connecting to this upper level terrace, so the whole thing will be experienced as a single landscape. And we've got a couple of short flights of stairs that get you to different landings on the Murphy staircase from building H. And in the background of this image, you can see the plaza at the lower level down in the Cambridge Crossing neighborhood, and building G behind.
G, you can see as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you come around the corner and you enter the neighborhood, the idea is that the entire thing, both the existing Murphy stairs and the new landscape, feels like a single threshold.
And again, just on the issue of the public elevator, you can see the upper canopy, the red canopy, and then down below, right here, you can see, of course, the slight projection. So this person will get in this elevator and will wind up there, or vice versa. We also want, so in the sense that, in the way in which Chris sort of greatly enlarged that stairway into an actual landscape, or kind of a vertical park, that aims itself down Daw Street. You'll also see that the same thing happens on the inside as well. If you happen to enter the building at the upper lobby, there's a set of escalators, and the whole shape of the lobby points down towards that lower plaza and down Daw Street. And also, if you were coming up Daw Street from the other direction from Roberts Building, you would also then be able to kind of look up that shaft of space up towards the Gilmore Bridge. All right, and then this is a diagram that suggests, and as we get into the issue of the lobbies, I think, again, we were probably not so clear on about where the cafe would be located. It seemed in the prior material that we showed you that it was sort of hidden a bit around from the corner, but that's never what we intended. The servery is a little bit behind, but the seating area is directly at that corner. Directly at the bottom of the escalators, again, you can see seats in the distance. So, in fact, as you look towards our building from Parcel G or further on Daw Street, you will look at that area of seating. And then we're suggesting these pivot doors, again, so that that cafe would spill out onto our plaza during the 3 seasons when that would be possible, comfortable, and desirable. We've also again, at the suggestion of the design staff, that larger pink area is where actually the fire, the required sort of fire door is for the fire inspector, and a mechanical system. We've converted that to glass, right? so that the sense of the transparency of the lobby would continue around the corner as well. Right? Okay. So now if we step back and stand across the intersection, you can see the lobby. You can see a sort of a newer idea that we also think we're sort of quite proud of, a very large green wall that would also be at the back of the seating area, quite visible if you move up from Child Street towards that intersection. You see that sort of larger canopy that allows you to kind of stay outside under cover, and it sort of extends the geometry of Daw Street. You can see the two red parts of the building, which are the public way to move up and down independently of the building, and you can see the extent of the Murphy Stair becoming a landscape at the very right. And this is the view from the lobby itself. The gentleman with our back towards us in the mid-ground is leaving through the front doors. You can see the sitting area at the tip, and you can see that this is all aiming itself down the length of Daw Street, as also Robert will talk about more specifically. You can see that the servery is just sort of out of the way slightly in order to have that continuation of a view down Daw Street along the length of the lobby, and as you move down the escalator as well from the upper lobby. I'm almost through. Again, the materials have been exactly the same as we've presented to you now over a year ago. The difference in the materials is actually a green wall, which occurs 3 times actually as you move up from the lower lobby up into the upper lobby as well. All right, I'm almost at the end. We actually thank you for pointing out that our bicycle location was less than ideal. For a variety of reasons that I'm not sure are worth describing now, we had split the bicycle area to either side of the driveway that you can see here and here, on the other side of the driveway that leads to the garage. And a number of you pointed out that that was really not very ideal. And there's also questions about how you get from the storage area of the bicycle back into the lobby. So we've greatly improved this to the point where we're extremely proud of this. We've moved some equipment and a couple of parking spaces out of the way. Don't tell Mark. And we've consolidated the bicycle area. You can see that kind of light bluish color right behind the lobby. So it's all on one side. And now you can actually if you wish, you can take your bicycle directly through the same door as the public elevator. This might be clear in the coming image, but if I may, so you can just take your bicycle, actually up the elevator if you wish, if you're leaving, or come right in here, and directly across you will find the bicycle storage area, the lockers as well. And when you want to go out into the lobby, it's again very, very close right there, and you're back in the lobby. And even if you park your bike way back here, there's a direct corridor to the lobby. And if you're a bit shy about this, trying to come in through sort of the front door, we've also retained, although fewer people I suspect will use it, we've retained a way to come in off the service drive along here, and also come into the bicycle area as well. So we think we've sort of now made it actually, you are sort of an equivalent individual, whether you walk in the building as a pedestrian or with your bicycle as well. And you have 2 ways to do so depending upon your level of modesty, given thin clothing and so forth. Okay. All right, and that's a kind of a detail of it that perhaps describes it a little bit clearer. So again, this is the front door to the building. These are the pivot doors for the cafeteria area. It spills out. This is the prominent door now, prominent facing door to both the elevators as well as directly into the bicycle storage area. All right, so this is in a sense a summary. So we have brought the building back to the point at which you approved it over a year ago, and also improved it in a number of ways that you've suggested. There are a number of other supplemental material that we can either get into much detail or just sort of check off, because it's also in your packages, a number of suggestions that have come through our discussions with the design team as well. So there's a list of all the materials in the building. Again, these are all responses to various questions, and they're identical as they were before. There is a description of the glazing and the performance of the glass and curtain wall system as well. You've asked for a 1 to 10 scale plan of the bicycle area to make sure that we've provided a sufficient number of spaces. There are 84 in the lower level, and there is a smaller area up above for another 28. We've also then provide a very substantial description of the mechanisms by which you support the bicycle and so forth. So again, we can pause at any of these if you'd like, if you have questions, or return to them. Lastly, at least for the moment from me, I'm not sure what, it doesn't seem to want to go to the next slide. We have also provided spaces for drop-off spaces for Uber or Lyft vehicles, and we're also describing to you the kind of the one-way and two-way system at this interchange. Again, the service area that moves upwards is both two ways. The diagonal is a one-way system. There's a drop-off there, and then you can also see the beginning of the connectivity between our plaza area to the next building's plaza area, which Robert will describe in great detail. So once more, we actually thank you for challenging us to make sure that we are indeed producing the building you approved a while ago, but also identified where we can make improvements, which we believe we have made. So with that, I think I'm going to stop and turn it over to, I guess, Mark and then Robert for Building G.
So are you moving on to G now?
Well, no.
I have one slide on H, and then I think that concludes.
Okay. Yes, I think, yes.
So just to thank you for your attention on H. It's our practice for every comment we receive from staff or from planning board to actually record every comment and respond. These are a list of the ongoing review items at the end of the staff memo. And as you can see from our notations here, several of the items have already been submitted in tonight's package. Others are clearly ones for future staff reviews, such as the review of tenant spaces that haven't been designed yet. And there are other items too that are simply unchanged from when they were previously approved by the planning board in 2017. So it's our hope that if the board were to vote to approve design review tonight, that that none of these items would prevent us from going on to apply for a building permit. That's really our goal at this point in the process. So thank you. We're happy to take your questions.
Okay. Board members, questions, comments about Building H? Hugh?
Well, I'm delighted to see that the design that we liked a year ago is now what's going forward, and I'm not going to go into whether the intermediate one was actually like that too, but we just couldn't see it. But I think I can see it now, and I think it's going to be a handsome building. I think it's actually going to be it's a very interesting facade with the combination of glass and panels. I'm a little surprised that the energy performance isn't better given that strategy, but I don't know what the baseline assumes. So I'm going to weigh in on a couple of points. I think it's ironic to have red elevators and red symbols going to the orange line. And I think there's actually, that 5 or 10 years from now, you're going to look at all of that color, whether it's red or orange, think maybe we could have been a little more tasteful. Does the soffit have to be red or bright colored? I think So I would like to, as these are, you're going to be, it's quite a while before you actually get to the point of having to look at that.
You can see, at least at smaller scale.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of shocking. As a bicyclist, I actually would like to find that elevator because I've walked up every time I've done the trip, I've had to walk up the Brian Murphy stairs, even though there is supposed to be an elevator there, and there is an elevator. It just doesn't seem to work when I'm there. So that's just a comment. This is something Susanna kind of helped me understand, is at the end facing H, there's a lot of wall which doesn't have inhabited things behind it. And if you have a service street, you got to have the services facing that street. And changing the blank wall to a shadow box will, under some lighting conditions, be very effective because often during the day you can't see inside the building anyway, but you'll see it the same material. But I would lobby for an additional tree, just one. If you see the black car there in the rendering, there's a tree just beyond it. Yeah, I think it'd be nice to have a tree there. It's going to create some challenges if you, with the bicycle parking, and also with the staff desire to have a pedestrian walkway along there, but I just think it's worth trying to do that. And now what's becoming a routine comment of mine is when you've got multiple doors going to a bike room, I think all those doors need to have operators on them because it's pretty hard to open a door, hold it, and take your bike through it. And it's pretty easy to put an operator on. So I hope you already have thought of that, but I think it's just got to become standard practice. Now that's a very short list for me, which I think is just a signal of how pleased I am with the way this project has ended up.
Perhaps it doesn't require much of a response, but on the color, which I think seems to shock some, on the color, which seems to shock some of you, for a long time there was concern that because it is not a freestanding elevator, because it's embedded in the building, that it would have to become somehow prominent. And we tried to make it much more prominent given where the door now is. And we also thought, and especially since you didn't, even if you came in at the lower level, you weren't quite sure where you would wind up at the upper level, that it should require some color. Some of us like color. Now, if you insist that it should not be red, but by the way, it's not a MBTA Orange Line station, so we probably wouldn't want to keep the exact same orange, but if you insist on a different color, we can show you alternatives for that color. And about the doors, yes.
I was going to say, we did put hold opens on all the bike room doors, and we're happy to add the tree. And for the color, we would accept your guidance on what you think is best.
I'm happy to let you work the color out with Susanna.
Lou?
Two things. The mechanical screening, is it transparent at all?
No. No, it's not.
That's
The other,
rendition of the model, yes.
the other thing that changed on a couple of drawings. Will there be a walkway down beside this building as well as G?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I had.
I think I have only one short comment. I've been supportive of the building, but perhaps with somewhat faint praise. You know, I found the modernist facade to be, somewhat relentless and not that much contrast to it. And when I look at an individual building, I said, yeah, okay, it's competent, but it didn't excite me. But there were actually several renderings here in which I saw not only the building that we're talking about, but some adjacent buildings. And if I looked at the adjacent buildings individually, I might have the same reaction with faint praise. But as a collection, it started becoming much more interesting to me. As a collection, there's interesting variety and contrast and geometries. It suddenly occurred to me that what's really relevant in this development, and as you presented, is not just the one building, but how the patterns and the architecture and the materials really work with the adjacent buildings. And on that basis, I found it very interesting, and I react much more positively. So, were this a standalone building, I would still be supportive with my faint praise. But as a collection and as a neighborhood, I'm feeling much more positive.
Thank you.
I say that's thanks to this gentleman here and DIVCO West in general, who encouraged each of the architects to respond to one another, but also respond in different ways. So that comes from our client.
Other comments, Mary?
Yeah. I don't have a lot to add, but I do appreciate all of the work that you've gone through to respond to the planning board's comments. I'm thrilled that you went back to the original building. I think it just looks fantastic, and I agree with Steve. In the context of the overall development, it looks even more significant and interesting. The color, I don't really have an opinion of red versus orange, but I do think color is helpful there. I think it not only tells you where the elevator is and all of that, but it just, in a sea of these big buildings, it just is like a little pop of something that kind of just makes you look, right? And then you've got that whole staircase, which is beautiful too. The only thing I wasn't really sure of was on the Gilmore Bridge. I know you are setting the building back so that the sidewalk is widened, but for some reason when I saw that slide, I felt like people were going through a construction zone as opposed to a finished sidewalk. And I think it might have been the rail, because I didn't understand the rail color at the time.
I'm just going to pull up that slide.
Yeah, if you would. Right, I just want to take another look at it. Yeah, I think, yeah, you were at the right one. Mm-hmm. There, right there. Maybe it's the panels behind the rail, or I don't know, but to me it looks a little bit like construction taping, or like, security taping. So I don't know whether it's the color or the dimension or just the way it sits against.
The red rail, you mean?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Whatever color it's going to be, rail?
Whatever it is, yeah. And maybe because it's red, it stands out more. If it was more of a, black or gray metal, you wouldn't notice it. But when I saw it, it just, that's what I thought. It's not finished. No, I love red. It looks funny to me. That's all.
So I just want to point out that the fact that some of the glass there is frosted was an intention, and also was one of the things that was discussed. That's an office space behind. So
okay.
We made the height of the glass frosted to a certain level, so you wouldn't necessarily be kind of looking at somebody sitting at their desk necessarily, right? So that it also looks a bit hazy there, but I think it's the appropriate thing to do to create a little bit of kind of a less transparent glazing to a certain height along that base, and that's what, in a way, maybe makes the red seem even more prominent. But
yeah.
we'll try to.
Well, I understand that. Maybe for me, it's more the dimension too. That it looks like the dimension of caution tape, and that's what my head went to initially. So anyway, yeah, I know. But all in all, it's wonderful. I mean, I have sat on that bridge, I can't tell you how many hours, and if I could be looking at trees, I would be thrilled. So thank you.
Nico?
So I really like the project. Who do you see as the intended use for the elevators? Is it mainly bicyclists?
No, we've actually done some informal kind of observation of the elevator, and there are folks in wheelchairs. There are folks with strollers, are actually a large population. Some bikers use the runnels that are on the stairs, where you can wheel your bike up and down the stairs. So, and some people just, prefer elevator to stairs and want a little break on their knees. So.
And so I'm just having a tough time visualizing why I would use either the stairs or the elevator. So, like, what is the traffic pattern that?
Yeah. So let me just go back. This is probably the most helpful diagram. So this is the Gilmore Bridge.
Yeah.
And so Charlestown is over here, Cambridge is over here. The Orange Line station, Community College, is approximately here. And so folks walking from Orange Line can walk, and now instead of walking in a kind of a concrete gully that fills with snow and ice, can walk next to the trees, maybe get away from the traffic through here, undercover, and in the elevator, and then back out to the Green Line or whatever their destination, and vice versa. So that's really the idea that this is a public benefit that the project offers.
Got it. Yeah, so just as a pedestrian, I would have a hard time imagining like this being open space. So I think the more wayfinding and inviting signage, the better. As far as color is concerned, I don't share my colleague's preference for orange, but I do like red aesthetically, but red is not inviting as a pedestrian. Like, I would not see red and think, oh, I should enter that area. I don't think anyone would. And so if the intended audience was mainly bicyclists, I would think green, if anything, was a more appropriate color because most bike signs are green in the city. But again, that I don't actually care what the color is you choose, but I would hope that when you are picking a color or you are actually constructing this, you keep in mind that there's a lot of buildings around Cambridge that are formally open to the public, but practically the public just does not recognize that the invitation has been made. And so to make that invitation as explicit as possible, I think is really important.
No, thank you for that point. And we agree, and there's more to be said about the signage that we've included, the wayfinding signage, as a way of really making explicit. We've spent a lot of time talking about the cues that a red color or some other color might give people, but there are also explicit statements that this is a public elevator, it is open to the public, it is available to the public. And this will actually, DevCo West is committed to making this a public easement, so it actually will be public land. So.
Great, thank you.
Corinne?
So I have one, is this working?
Yes.
One formal comment and then two asides that are not at all formal. So I agree with most of my colleagues' comments and appreciate very much the attention to comments that were made earlier, and would encourage the ongoing design review. The staff memo was very thorough and comprehensive, so that's my only formal comment. And then just informally, I think color preference is totally up to you all. Personally, I think it's culturally relevant what we think is tasteful. So I personally think hot pink and turquoise and all sorts of things are tasteful. And I also just wanted to mention along those cultural lines that when I see images and I don't see tons of diversity in them, that tells me something about how welcoming a place is. So I see you've done a little bit of that, but just informally, I would love to see more diversity when I see renderings to know that all sorts of people are welcome.
Thank you. We share that view and want to make sure that we communicate that both in how we design the buildings and also how we depict them. So.
Okay, I have two comments. I like color, and I think it looked good. And in regard to that, there was an earlier draft that showed the larger canopy in color, and I was just curious why that was reduced in size, because I think the larger actually was in keeping with what Nico said, is that it makes it more of a signal to the public that that is a space that they're welcome to and that is something different from the rest of the building.
So we did go through several iterations with staff and really labored over making the canopy, and we accept your guidance as to whether we've got it right or it still needs work. The thinking behind, we did show a previous iteration, which I think made it into some of the renderings that were distributed, that had the canopy extending all the way across.
Yes.
And the concern with that from the part of the staff was that it would actually extend over the entrance to the lobby for the office building. And while this is open to the public and is not the point of security of the lobby, that in fact having the red focused here over the elevators made more sense, because it really signaled that that was the place of the public elevator. So we're good with either version, and we're also happy to work on that if that's an area of ongoing design review that you'd like us to examine more thoroughly. But that's the history of it, and that's the reason why this version is in this rendering today.
Okay. Well, I understand what you're saying. I personally liked the full length, which I thought, both as a design pop of color was larger, and also I felt it was clearer to the public that they could go in there. But I'm happy with you just continuing to discuss it. My other comment is with regard to the penthouse, and I appreciate that you've gone further back to what the original approval was, but I still have a question about the western facade. And if in the material I was looking on, it was on page 55.
I'm not sure I can pull that up here.
It's
yep,
the western elevation.
Yes.
And one of my comments is that the most people are going to interact with this building from quite a distance away. They will be on O'Brien Highway, they'll be on Route 93, they'll be on the Gilmore Bridge. They're not going to be the people who are right in Cambridge Crossing looking up. They're going to be in their cars or on bikes or on the Leechmere, the Green Line, quite a distance. So I think the sight lines of what people can see from a distance are significant. And with regard to that, and I'm not certain, and maybe you can clarify it for me, or you can clarify it for me, the western elevation, there is still at one corner that mechanical box breaks the diagonal, and it really drives me crazy.
Yep.
That you've got such a beautiful line, and from that one point of view, it's being interfered with. And I would really appreciate it in your ongoing discussions with CDD, with staff, whether you can do something about that to either notch that box down there, or it was even suggested that the diagonal parapet could be raised slightly more, just so that you can keep that line. Now, I realize, I think there's probably building G is on the other side, and there aren't that many people who are going to see it, but
I think it's worth just going back to some of the original diagrams. So in elevation, it is like nails on a chalkboard. You see that corner breaking the profile of the building, the silhouette of the building, and I share your discomfort with that. It's just important to recognize, though, and Alex can speak to this, that the place on the ground where you would actually see over that parapet and see a little corner of actually parapet wall. It's not even equipment, it's actually wall is quite limited. So Alex can speak to this diagram, but it's really this location and this location between buildings are the only places you'll be able to see that corner.
Yeah, and you are hundreds of feet back, and you are looking at many, many other things. So the possibility that you would focus on that particular thing and be kind of horrified, I think, is fairly slight. Also, when you look at this is kind of where we went wrong with you last time. We showed you facades. So it looks like that is up against the parapet. It's actually set back quite a distance, which is also not, you can't see because you're looking at an elevation where everything is a plane. So that point is also set back quite a distance. And again, as Mark said, it is the little purple areas here are the only places where you would see that if you happen to focus on that spot and that spot alone, but you are looking past a wonderful building that you're about to hear described between you and one across the street as well. We're also concerned about just the proportion of the parapet. From my sense, it's getting a little bit higher than I wish it was, and kind of floating, kind of rattling in the wind, if you will. So I hope that you would not insist upon that, but if you did, I suppose we will keep looking at it with
Well, I personally would not insist upon it, but I'd like to know what Hugh thinks. And
well, I've looked at the studies that have been presented to us, and I studied them, and I think Alex is correct that you're not going to notice that from 2 blocks away looking through trees. And that it's, it works, but if you try to draw an elevation, it doesn't. So if you're hovering 80 feet above the ground, you'll see it. People in, in EF might see it.
attendance in June.
And they'll protest.
Right. So, and it is funny, like when you get up high in a building, you look at roofscapes and you kind of marvel in all the stuff you see and the complexity of the roofs. From the ground, you feel like somebody's made a mistake if you can see it. I don't know what level that consciousness switches, but so I'm to say I think Alex is correct that you won't perceive it.
Well, you will, sir, but perhaps very few.
Right.
I have the same thoughts, Jen. I've been looking on there's some fairly long views down Dawes, and it doesn't appear that it protrudes. It was bothering me. I thought I saw it on one of the drawings, and I chased it around for an hour.
Okay. Well, I personally would not insist on it being changed, but having raised the comment, if you would consider it in your ongoing discussions with Suzanne and the other members of CDD, whether
your comment and others, Lou and others who shared that comment, I can't remember everyone who shared it. We studied that long and hard in the intervening months. So the reason we can say this to you now that we don't believe it's a problem is because we've changed the design and we've tried to address it.
Okay. Should we take action on these individually as we go through them?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So I guess let me ask Jeff or someone else on staff. It is an accurate statement that they have received the approvals from the City of Boston and the City of Somerville that we're going to acknowledge have been received.
I'm getting a nod from the back that we received that documentation, yes.
Point of clarification, this building is only in Boston and Cambridge, so there are no Somerville approvals for this.
I understand, but there is a Somerville, perhaps it's just Boston.
Yep.
Okay. So, and whomever is going to nod, that the final gross floor areas, subject to whatever typos that had to be corrected, are indeed accurate.
Yes, that we did receive, and the corrected version is, it's just a kind of Scrivener's corrections. So we'll make sure that the updated version gets put in the file along with the design review approvals.
Okay. So then we need to take a vote to approve the final plans subject to ongoing review by CDD in accordance with comments made this evening in the memorandum that was prepared by CDD, and that we approve, acknowledge the receipt of final approval, or with the appropriate approval from the City of Boston, and we acknowledge the update of the final gross floor area for this building. Is there anything else that you needed from us with regard to Building H? No? So could I have a motion to make those findings?
So moved.
All right, all those in favor? Thank you. If we could move
Thank
on
you very
to
much.
Building G.
Thank you. We look forward to getting a permit and getting underway.
Good evening. My name's Robert Brown. I'm the Managing Director for the Perkins Well office in Boston and the lead architect for Parcel G. As you all know, the site, we're sitting adjacent to the west of Parcel H, and we have equally found 5 points, interesting, the same number, of areas where there had been question, and we'll be comparing what we had shown in 2017 to what we are now proposing today. There is first there will be the transition from the more masonry precast building to the glass building, commonly called the zipper. The podium facade itself at the very base and how that has been defined and I think become much more humane and textural. The third is actually how are the sunshades done, because we are suggesting, and we've had some concern with our curtain wall consultant and what happens with ice and snow and other things when they're solid, and they're but we do want to have the detail that's there. The north facade, how that's been resolved, actually we're returning, as many of us have, towards 2017. There's not been greater sense of detail that's there. And then lastly, the penthouse screening that we just talked about on H, very similar, but probably more impactful because there's a lot more equipment that sits on a lab building. So just to start with, a little bit of organization on the plans. Dawes Street is at the bottom of the plan, and sitting here, a great open spaces off to the side that's adjacent, and the over is the borrowed landscape from our lobby. The lobby is sitting here, and we have pivot doors that really connect that inside and outside, and you'll see a perspective sketch in a second of that. The bicycle parking does not change in this portion of the building, but is accessible through both the building and from the outside, and sits with the back of the house. Main tenant space on the first floor, a garage elevator, pedestrian elevator down to the garage off to this corner. The service drive that ties in with the service area that's off of H. We have our loading dock that's here, and our parking extends around the backside, coming into that backside here. And then a landscape treatment that I'd like to have Chris sort of talk about, because it really enhances that first portion of the building.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Probably the most significant development that we've made recently in the landscape, at least since you saw it over a year ago, is at the streetscape on the Dawes Street side, where we have a single row of street trees that remains unchanged, and then this grove of flowering multi-stem trees behind the sidewalk, between the building and the sidewalk. We've added what we're calling a community table that relates to the food truck plaza. on the southeast corner. It's really just a long line of picnic tables, but it will be a permanent feature and somewhere that whether you bought food at the food trucks or brought it down from the building would be a nice gathering spot here. And most of the rest of the landscape is very similar to what you've seen before, the west side. The lobby opens up and addresses the recreation field. This open space, the series of retaining walls along the parking garage ramp, and then the large-scale evergreen trees on the back, on the north side of the building. And then, as Lou mentioned, we've added sidewalks on both sides of the service drive along G and H, and enlarge this space where FedEx and delivery trucks can stop at the side of the building, in addition to the drop-off spaces right here in front of the lobby.
So on that, on the second floor, and actually on the third floor here, we have a second floor terrace that happens to be somewhat coincidental to McGrath and O'Brien Highway, so that there's really sort of a three-dimensional landscape. Also just want to point back, you know, somewhat different than the guidelines have typically said, which the buildings would be sitting very hard on the street edge. This has been set back. This was an early comment that we got from staff and yourselves. And then we took the entire mass of the building and really pushed it back, and so to create as much of an opening and as much sun that can come down into this area as possible. And so now we'll go through sort of what was proposed before and the few variations that exist. This is coming down Dawes Street. You can see parcel H in the background, and then there's the Zachem Bridge that's beyond that. So on H, the massing is divided into two pieces. There's sort of a glassy portion. This is the 2017 approved design, and then a more masonry piece, and then the lobby space is coming out. And the comment has been about this zipper piece and how that's being done. In the 17 design, we had some elements that were cutting across it. The discussion was maybe this should be in a much more vertical position, and we're actually going to be sort of combining these two in the next slide that says that, in fact, how can we make this a little bit deeper, and is there a way to stitch it together? So we're willing to look at both concepts, and this last slide shows in a more illustrative way. We've been talking about extending the glass back about 2 feet instead of previously it was 9 inches. But we thought that by bringing the fin across, that you really got a greater sense of depth that was there. And sort of, it sort of separates and also stitches together those two. So on one hand, it's dealer's choice. You'd have 3 options, but we're personally feeling that the last one on the very right side is the most successful for the building. The other question was about this podium. And so the podium is those 2 stories. They're high stories, both at 18 feet, so that they're almost creating 3-story height that's sitting on, which is closer to what the guidelines are saying. There were questions about the canopy, and so the previous canopy was much more of a precast element, and you can see it right now. It's much more in the metal world. We'll have another canopy that's suggestive on the garage entry that's very similar. There was the idea of, on one scheme earlier on, we had contiguous, well, how about that? We care about box. Yeah, I'm okay. Let's see. So, in the original design, these fins were contiguous, and I think the comment that had come from from staff was that it was much more of a horizontal expression. And this is actually a serrated piece, so that this glass comes up, pulls out, goes down, goes up. And so, on a previous scheme, the very original 2017 scheme, this was a metal panel We would like to have it in glass, and as you can see, that glass extending down, and I think it really creates much more of this vertical rhythm that we'd like at the base in that area. Another area that we've identified is the fire command station, and it's required by the Cambridge Fire Department to have it on the exterior wall with direct access in. Earlier scheme had shown it that it was in stone, that had a signage on it, and I think there was a concern of discontinuity between sort of the glassy lobby and then what would be glassy tenant space, and so we have that as a reflective glass surface, similar to what Alex was talking about on the H building on that far wall, still having some signage that's sitting there. And so we think we've really addressed that podium in a much more dynamic quality than it was in the previous scheme. And this shows the two renderings, 2017 on the left. The one slight variation was that we had a wooden ceiling at that time, and as the lobby has developed, the lobby walls themselves are wood, and that there's a much more transparent plaster material. Activity there, so in our sense, color from the warmth of the wood going forward. And then from the very far side, we're at Dawes and Childs. This is the service drive going in. This 2017 entry had a expanded massing on this corner, and when we met with staff, there was much more an interest of suggesting that we move more towards a little bit more of a subtle canopy that's more similar to the canopy that's on the opposite side. This rendering also shows the food trucks that are sitting there, the community table, very similar to what we had on the previous scheme. And then the sunshades. The sunshades were at the November meeting reduced in dimension, and I think everyone was concerned about that. So we have returned to the 18 and 24 inches. The difference is that as we've talked to our curtain wall consultant and have done some experiments, we are concerned about the depth, not so much of the total depths. The original scheme was saying 24 inches. We're going to be 24 inches out, but we need to have a gap so that if there's driving snow or ice or something, that does not have a place to start creating a little lip, then it freezes and thaws, and you really have a problem. So we are setting it off 6 inches, and I think in a way it presents a nice detail on the corner. So here you can see the connection before. It lets a little bit of light through, a different kind of pattern. So I think it's actually adds nice quality to it, to those fins. And then on the north side, this is the side that faces Boston. We really, again, we returned to what was a folded plate that had a slight articulation. You'll see it in a second. And there, we had dropped a fin that was at the very top that you can see on the signage side. On this side, there's a fin, and that's been returned, and you'll see that in a second. So, key to our building is the color of the precast, and so though those pieces are exactly in the same area, this on this side of the fold is a white, and on this side of the fold it is white here. And so those are the three materials. The primary articulate light spaces, and then the darker gray. So we're going to be experimenting with how that ultimately works. And then the fin that's at the very top, so that you get, we certainly have to get a fair amount of air that's going into the building, and so those fins are there just to replicate the fins that are happening throughout the rest of the facade. So let's talk about the penthouse. In a similar way, we've been really experimenting with where these components are. We've been pushing down as much as we possibly can. We actually have been able to raise on the Boston side, but we cannot go any higher than 270. That's Boston's height piece. And we've also been working on the south parapet to make sure that that's not visible also. And so we've, just as an idea, if you were looking right down on the roof, the amount of equipment that is there, there are elevator overrides and roof access stairs. And then similar to what Alex had shown, really we're probably across B to B. It's almost 2,000 feet before we could see anything, and we have the EF buildings on that side that are in the way. And on the Gilmore Bridge, we're 761 feet and 2,000 feet. But more clearly, there's sort of three spots that we're seeing, number 1, 2, and 3, where you could actually maybe catch a glimpse. But as we look through on the renderings from the models, you can't see them. And the only way you would see them is if we were further away and there are buildings that are obscuring that. So I think we can say pretty safely that the penthouse is the visible piece, but the equipment is not. And then there's been some supplemental questions on some of the components. It goes back to that question of, do these fins on the corner extend as we're showing here, which we like, or do they become contiguous? We would like to keep the fins as we've got shown. Chris mentioned about the in the red where the service FedEx drop-offs are and the UPS, as well as a sidewalk that's extending down towards the service drive. And then on the bike parking, our parking is fine. We just wanted to identify the bike rack design that's going in. And then lastly, the direction of traffic, both on Childs and on Dawes, is two-way traffic. There's one-way traffic coming off the driveway onto Dawes Street. And then I think Mark will identify the bus.
So that concludes the G presentation. Again, we've probably too emphatically gone through every single continuing review item to let you know if it's something that we've already submitted, something that's unchanged from the 2017 approval, or things like the mock-up or the tenant space that we'll be reviewing in the future with staff. And again, it's our hope that if the board wished to approve the design review for this building, that these would not stand in the way of us obtaining a building permit.
Board, questions, comments? Hugh?
So I'm assuming the answer on bike access doors is the same for building H as it was for G. I would note that you added 2 doors in the access route for the bikes. Before there was 1, now I think there are 3. And so, so they're precast colors. There's a building which is actually on your model, which is the new EF building. Or is it on your model? Maybe it's not on your model.
Yeah, the one closest to you.
It's
no, it's the one that's under construction now, that one. Yeah. Which uses multiple colors in a precast panel. The renderings show a decent amount of contrast. You go out there today, and under certain lights, the contrast is very reduced. The panels are also dirty because they've been trucked from a long distance. They're going to be washed. That may change it. The other project is in Central Square, the 19-story apartment building, which has a mixture of purple brick and a sort of a gray precast color that's next to it. And if it's in the sun, it looks just like the rendering. And if you're on the north side of the building, the 2 colors, the brick and the gray, are almost the same value. And so we've been trying to understand this phenomenon, and it seems to do with how precast catches the light and the sun, and or the bright clouds, or the case of the one side of the Central Square building. The adjacent building all has a white facade, white paper facade right now, so it is very bright. It won't ultimately have a white paper facade, but And it seems that it's pretty tricky to achieve the patterns. I look at your colors, and in this room they seem to be pretty demonstrably different. And that seems to be important. I think but I don't, I wonder if the EF panels were in this room, they would look more different. So this is a problem of whether your intent can be achieved, or how it can be achieved. And I don't have any answers. I don't think Susanna has answers, but we note that it's an issue that, as precast is used in this way more frequently, it's a sort of a learning process for us. It may not be so much of a learning process for you.
Well, I would say that you've described the qualities of precast in a very positive way, and we're actually trying to take advantage of that. So, particularly, I'd say on the north side, which is going to be catching glimpses of light, the folding of that panel is to do just what you're showing. In some light, it may be somewhat uniform. In other light, that white will come across as a very sharp color, and I wouldn't be surprised that, say, the two grays in other lights could almost feel the same. And so in a most positive way, it's doing that dance just like a brick building would be. In some cases, brick in a shadow is going to be very dark, and as a watercolorist, I always use a purple as that color. And so I think it is that quality that we know to be of the precast. So I think the way you've described it is exactly how we're imagining it, and that's what we want to have happen as the sun changes going around the building.
So maybe your mock-up has to be on a turntable, or maybe you need to have, 2 or 3 different orientations of the precast.
Well, we have been looking at from your comments and then just our knowledge, we have been looking at the colors, and we'll be certainly moving these around and probably getting a little bit larger panels before we do the big mock-up to assure, because we're pushing the envelope a little bit, but I do think that the quality that you've described, where there'll be times when it will look very similar, and there'll be many other times when there's a very sharp difference, is there. And I would say the one thing is we don't want it to be a black and white kind of building where the stripes are just so clearly defined.
So I have one other question, which is about the sunshades. How thick are the sunshades?
Patrick.
So they're thicker close to the curtain wall then?
Yes. Right, so they're about 24 inches deep, 2 inches to 6 inches.
And they're metal? Is that
They're
correct?
metal, yes.
Because it's more the gap between the building and the sunshade, which in the renderings is a little disconcerting. But if the gap is about the same as the thickness at that point, it may not be as as dramatic as your renderings say. And I was going to ask you how small the distance is, but I'm pretty sure that distance is very important to the concerns that you explained to us about snow and ice and buildup.
Right, it's the biggest concern is sort of that driving snow that sort of all of a sudden on all of our houses kind of builds up a little bit of a swale, next thing you know, and then it freezes, and then if we do get the sun, and we are on the south side, so we're very likely to get some fairly good freeze thaw that could occur. What we need to do is have that separate from that glass so that stays at probably 32 degrees no matter what's happening. Or if it's thawing, it's dripping. It's not all of a sudden creating a big swale. So we had heard that there was a concern about that. We think that the 6 could maybe go to 4, but I think anything less could be very problematic. And I'd actually like to research it a little bit more carefully.
I think the smallest distance that works will probably give the best appearance from my eye.
Well, we can certainly take a look at that. There's a misprint in our 100-page thing on the lead page, so we couldn't see what performance you were getting in the column. Here's the page, and the summary column didn't get printed. Oh, really?
We'll obviously provide a clean copy for record. We have submitted that as well for Article 22 review. If there was a specific question, maybe we know, but.
Well, I was wanting to give you a hard time on energy performance. I don't have the data. Because it's, so I don't know whether but that's obviously, the concern is that buildings perform from an energy point of view better than they typically have. LEED gives you a gazillion points, many of which have been given are basically a function of what the designers and the owners in the succession of owners and designers have created as a community. Those get you a bunch of points. And so it's, we have a specific goal of net zero buildings. And so you have to have a relatively efficient skin and efficient equipment. You're perfectly clear that you can't do net zero. And I think we don't understand how to do that for lab buildings yet. But some future residents are going to be happy the closer you get. So those are my comments.
Is it?
We are meeting LEED Silver, which is the criteria. We can print that page for you. Yep.
Okay. Other comments? Lou?
I'm going to kind of go along with Hugh's comments on the contrast in the precast. He's absolutely correct on the EF building is just a white building now. I mean, in most light. Really don't want that to happen to this building. I don't know if enhanced mock-ups are in order somehow or some different contrast, because they're very similar to what should have been on the EF building, and they are just washed out. And I know you're trying not to have a striped building, but you may think about trying some heavier contrast. Kind of worried this turns into a gray building most of the time, especially on the north face. It's all in the shade. So please do your best to try to reinforce that contrast. Yeah, and even if it has to be in changing light, it needs to really need to hit the mark on this one.
Just on that point, if I could just ask, is it possible to use different finishes or different textures on the precast?
It's a challenge to have different finishes and textures. One time we were looking at having like a troweled finish or something like that,
Yeah.
almost like that plaster finish, and the precasters kind of looked at us like we were kind of crazy. But this would, it's one is sort of cost prohibitive. It reduces the quality of the finish, and they really can't guarantee it. That's the worst thing. So the
Yeah.
worst would be all of a sudden we got this spatulata or something that's very unusual. So we have found in the past that sort of this light, essentially what looks like a light sandblasting, it's not sandblasted, but a light sandblasting where the surface is able to be even, allows that to happen. But I totally agree with you. I mean, we're at the point where we need to explore these a little bit more clearly. We think there's enough contrast, but well, yep, yep. Well, we've got quite a wide range. I mean, this is it's like paint. We can sort of pick what we'd like.
On the higher overhang on the cornice, the bottom of that masonry top level with that thin edge kind of looks funny to me. I don't know if anybody else noticed that on the podium, correct? Where you continued the narrower band on the bottom of the wider band. And next one back, keep going. Yeah, see, on the corner, that narrow, it just kind of looks funny, especially on the corner itself. I mean, it probably disappears directly from the side. I know you're mimicking that, but it just, I mean, it's not a big deal, but it doesn't look very substantial. It just kind of doesn't tie them together. It makes them really separate. I don't know. It was just something that bothered me. I had to say something. It looked like it should have been wider, possibly, or something to give it more mass. I don't know.
We did have a wider version.
Yeah.
It just felt a little too heavy and funky. So
Okay. Yeah. No, it's just one or the other. I just had to say something because it bothered me. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Seemed more you.
That was looking a little heavy.
Yeah.
So we reversed it over here.
It wasn't the end of the world. Just. Now, my favorite subject, mechanical enclosures. The renderings on 101, 102.
So those are flat elevations.
Well, if you look from our vantage point, the back of this building is very visible.
They're above the roof.
I know it is, but even if I were down, you have a space in the building beside it, and you have some pretty long views, especially from the T and from those vantage points. Here it shows that all the mechanicals are visible. Seems like there's no effort to hide any of the mechanicals on this facade. Page 102, 101, 102.
I think.
Now, if that's not the case, 101 and 102.
We actually, I apologize, we can't pull those sheets up. We are familiar with those elevations, though, and of course, those are looking flat on.
Well, not really flat on. It's not like I'm in a helicopter. I'm kind of lower than the building.
I think.
Actually, I mean, it's a flat elevation, so it would be as if you're standing right here, just like you're on it. So.
Yeah, I don't
We were looking at.
think so.
That view.
If I were in the park,
You're in the park.
and I was looking up through the gap in the building,
Maybe it'd be worth going through. We
that's-
have site diagrams that show that, if that's.
I mean, this diagram does show the enclosure angling off into the that's not what you have here. This is why I'm curious. I don't know what we're going to get.
Do you want to?
Well, so the sections that we're showing, let's just talk about the one that probably is most concerning. So there's A, and so this is the section A. There's the low portion, there's the high portion on the Boston side. You have to be 1,339 feet if we're at the grade with the MBTA viaduct in front of you before anything would be creeping up from the pedestrian perspective.
And if you were on the rear of the viaduct, in the EF Center?
If we're in here, then it's much steeper. I mean, anything from here to here, you cannot see. That front edge of the parapet wall is hiding anything that's behind that. And we put any of the larger equipment, which is essentially the fans, on the Boston side on the back side, so that we're achieving as best we can that separation.
The documents, I can see the whole cooling tower. I can see all of the stacks from bottom to top.
Well, it's a flat elevation, because so flat elevation is the same condition that we were talking about on here.
I understand, but on this roof, I see the enclosure dying into the flat, correct? It angles down and dies into the flat part of the roof, right? I'm very concerned with this. This is just I don't know how.
I think we heard you and we heard others on the board
This
loud
would
and
be-
clear last time, and we've actually raised that lower parapet in order to make sure that when you're standing on the ground, that the parapet wall hides your line of sight up to the equipment. If you look at this diagram, it shows the only places at grade where you'll be able to see past that front parapet wall up to just a tippy top, and you can see the image there, what you would see.
So if I were standing in the behind the viaduct at the new condominiums on the, right behind them, I forget the name of the Avalon Bay project.
Right here.
No, to your right and down. So if I was standing in there looking through the gap in the building,
Yes.
what would I see?
You would only see parapet.
See
You would
the
not see
parapet
any
wall.
mechanical.
I'm hoping you're right. I mean, even from east and west views on 104, and I don't know where we're looking from here, we see the top of the cooling tower, and we see the top of all the stacks.
Because it's that's a flat elevation.
And we didn't have one that, it worries me, because whatever we okay right here is what you get to build. And it's kind of hard to change them after they're built.
Correct. We feel like we've, and I think the comment was well-founded at the last meeting, and we took it to heart and really worked at lowering the height of the equipment, raising the height of the southern parapet. And I think based on where you would stand on the ground and look up, that it really is these three pink areas where you could actually see a tip of a piece of equipment, in this case the strobic fans. So I think your experience would not be as it's described in the elevation drawings. I think that's part of how we went wrong last meeting, is in depicting the mechanicals with those drawings.
That's about all I had, but that's a very big concern that this will become very visible. And because there's a lot of mechanicals on this roof, I mean, I understand they have to protrude, but because of the slope, if they're exposed at all, there's a lot of exposure.
Other comments? Anyone else?
Yeah, I guess I would just say briefly that there's a lot going on in this building. I like the play of materials and glass and precast, and I like the angles in the building, and it makes it perpetually interesting. I would hate to see the contrast in that precast that we're talking about disappear entirely. I certainly understand that it's going to be more pronounced in some lights than others. I'd hate to see the contrast disappear entirely. So I hope you can work on that. But I tend to look at the big picture on these things, and in the big picture, it seems to be a very successful building.
Mary, Nico, Corinne? No. Susanna, we have your memo, your comments on that, but do you want to add anything to this conversation?
I think our comments have all been responded to. Just with the mechanicals, I think that elevation may be an error because the stacks are above the parapet in elevation, but not on the east and west sides. So, yeah. Okay. But so we can continue to look at the stacks and any mechanicals above the parapet.
Okay.
Yes. 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 Okay.
And do you want to add anything about the coloration?
I think Hugh has described our concerns quite well. It's something we'll continue to look at as part of the mock-up review and looking at having multiple orientations so we can experience different light conditions and also being able to look at the mock-up from a distance. Sometimes we're sort of trapped on site only a few feet away, so that's something we'll want to make sure with the mock-up that it's in the right location.
And I'll remind everyone that we do get notice when the mock-ups are available to be viewed, and it's helpful if everybody can go and look at them and give Susanna whatever comments they have. Are we prepared to move forward with this now? Yes, okay. So again, have a motion to approve the final plans, subject to ongoing review with staff with regard to the issues that were raised this evening, and certainly with regard to the issues that are set forth in staff's most recent memo. And that in doing so, we'd also acknowledge that the City of Boston has given its approval as necessary with regard to these plans, and acknowledge the final GFA that's been received. Could I have a motion? So moved. And a second. All those in favor? Again. Thank you.
Thank you
Good
very
luck.
much. And I do want to thank the board also for, I guess, a year ago, that sunny side of the Dawes Street comment that made us think anew about that ground plane and how that could be activated. So we're all looking forward to seeing that come to fruition. Next up is parcel W.
Parcel W. Yeah.
Should we take a recess, or would you like us to continue?
A 2-minute recess.
Yes, thank you.
did you go anywhere for the holidays?
No, well, Maine was the farthest I went. I was here for Christmas at my brother's house, and then so my place in Maine is just seasonal. But the couple that lives across the street from me, they bought a year-round place, and so they usually do like a New Year's party on December 30th before the crazies all get out. So I went up and stayed from that day.
Where in Maine?
Wells. So it's a quick drive up and everything, but it was nice of them to let me stay with them. So there was like 50 or 60 people at the December 30th party, and she had kind of a very impromptu party for 14 hours.
Wow, that's great.
So we were busy. How about you?
They were quiet. We celebrated Hanukkah down in New York a couple of weeks, in the middle of December. And then it was just quiet here. Got together with friends. All right.
I don't usually like New Year's, so I thought I would try.
Lou, could we? John, stop defacing the walls. I said that there was like a little plot. I don't know what he's doing. He thinks he manages the building, so what?
We could do our job single-handed.
What?
We could do our job single-handed.
Okay. So we're now on Building W. Proceed.
Good evening. I'm Mark Eclipse with PCA Architects, the architects for Parcel W. So we only have 4 issues. So this should go quick. A couple of them we heard at the November meeting that we had, and a couple of them are from Planning Board staff memo. And we'll address those today and show you some of the revisions we've made. All, like the other 2 buildings, very good suggestions, and we do think that the building has improved tremendously from those comments. So the first is the northwest corner transparency. So these are the plans, the second floor plan on the top, ground floor plan on the bottom, that show what we came with in November, which is we actually moved the mechanical well on the second floor, the utility rooms on the first floor, all the way over into that corner, which made us have to do opaque spandrel glass, which we agree was probably not the best move. So this is what we came back with, that we heard a suggestion from the board to move the mechanical well and those utilities over. So we moved them to the east, which is to the right in the plan, which creates a space right on that corner, which allows us to have that entire corner from the north side down to the west side and all the way around to be fully transparent. We actually raised up the landing of the stair so that you could actually inhabit that space underneath. So there's actually a little section right on the corner, which is actually a 2-story high space, the underside of the landing, and part of the stair on the downside, which is this, and all of the upside is high enough that you can have a space underneath. The other thing we did was we moved the elevator and the machine room down a little bit so you actually have a passageway. So you have 2 ways to access that space, either through that passageway or you can actually get underneath the stair here. So it actually, you can imagine if this was a restaurant, you could have seating under there, you could have just other active space. So again, that entire facade is now transparent glass. So these are the elevations. The top one is the 2017 approved west elevation. The one on the bottom is our current proposal. So actually in the approved elevation, it was fully transparent. We went to spandrel. We've gotten rid of all that spandrel, and now that entire facade is clear glass. One other change that we've made is to add a little bit of nanowall here, and I'll actually explain that a little bit later. We were also asked to show sort of closer perspective. So this is right on the other side of North First Street, looking at that northwest corner. You can see a lot of activity of people going up and down the stair, and you can see that entire space underneath the stair and kind of in that double height space right in the corner. And 2 stories of full glass wrapping the corner, going all the way along the west facade. It actually wraps around the other corner too. One thing to note is every east and west facade of this building has full transparency that wraps around the corner. And this is the view standing directly across North First Street, looking right down that open bay in the middle, looking right through the park. You can see that transparency on both floors all the way across, kind of the warmth and glow and just like really activating First Street. So the second was a comment from the CDD staff memo, was about the second floor windows on the south side of the building. This is the side of, the side that faces North Point Boulevard. So in the approved elevations, or the approved plans from 2017, we had glass here, and then all the way to the corner. As we developed the design and worked out the structure, we actually had to add some structural bracing, which when we came back in November, we had to move some of the windows. We actually deleted a window. So what we've come back with now, this is our current proposal, is we're adding a window back in and actually making it that operable nano wall. So this is the location that used to be glazing, and then you had glass, and then you had a solid, and then glass. This is where the structural brace is, that now we've sort of taken what was glass here and put it here. As we've developed the design all the way around all the buildings, we've had to kind of shift glass a little bit here and there for structural reasons or other reasons. Overall, there's no change in the amount of glass on the building. A couple minor things. We made this door 6 inches wider. We just wanted to point that out. It's an access door. We felt it would be better for service going in and out if it was just 6 inches wider. We added a door here, which just gives better access from the inside of the space to the plaza. So just better indoor-outdoor connection. So this actually shows a little bit better kind of what I was talking about, where the upper elevation is what was approved in 2017. The lower elevation is what we're proposing today. You can see this was where we had glass that's now bracing. There was some sections of solid wall. We're now from the corner all the way to this location, it's all glass, mostly nano wall. On the ground floor, that's the 6 inch wider door. In between the 2017 approval and what we're showing today, we did come back with a sort of an informational update with some revisions that we had made based on that first meeting. Even though it was approved, we had some comments. Some of those comments were to add some of the greenery that you see that stays, to change actually the color of the wood from a really gray color to something much warmer. We have some samples on the table. They're not exactly the colors. We're still kind of in process working on the final colors, but the idea is that you have a lighter and a darker, but they're both very warm. So the third issue was the location of mechanical louvers. This is the original approved plan. You can see the mechanical well was in a completely different location, and they were actually much bigger with just a little bit of louver at the top there. As we developed the design and we picked our final mechanical system, which is actually a very efficient, energy efficient, it's actually a pretty quiet system, but in doing that, it actually required more louvers. So you can see both the change in location of the mechanical wells and the addition of the louvers. Now these louvers are intake louvers only. There's not going to be any exhaust that's dumping down into the space in between the buildings or down under the street level. All exhaust goes straight up through the roof. Again, these are sort of intake only. We also thought this was sort of the best location for them, kind of on the north side of each of the buildings. And then you get a better sense here in the elevations. Again, the top elevation was what was approved. Really no louvers in this side. And the lower one shows the louvers that we need for the new mechanical systems. And this is the north side from the street. Again, previously, back in the approved elevation, when the mechanical well was all the way on the side, there was a lot of spandrel glass, which now that we've moved to this location, you can see that glass on both sides returns all the way around the corner. And the last thing was there was a question about what is NanoWall. So NanoWall is a folding, operable, glazed wall. And so this is not our project. This is an example of another place where they have NanoWall. You can see in a closed position, it looks like regular glazing. As you're folding it open, you can kind of get a sense of what it does. It's just kind of accordion folds. And then in the fully open position, all of the panels stack on one side or the other, and you get full opening in between. So we have some elevations. This is the east elevation facing the park, where we have kind of most of the NanoWall. Top elevation is what was approved. It was all fixed glazing at that point, with just some doors to get out onto the terrace and doors to get out into the park. And again, you can see when we had that mechanical well, that whole half of the second floor was spandrel. It's now clear, which you can see in the middle elevation. And you can see that and all of that is all operable, all NanoWall. So facing the park, we thought that was the best place to have it. And you get this really great connection between the indoors and the outdoors right out to the park. A couple of small places where we added some NanoWall. Again, the top is what was approved in 2017. The bottom is what we're proposing today. This is standing inside that center bay. And there's just a little bit of NanoWall on this corner that wraps around to the west side, facing North First Street. And this is the new NanoWall that we've added on the south side. So we kind of end with a picture that we like a lot of standing in the park. You can see it actually shows the NanoWall open at different locations. It just shows that sort of activation of the park and a connection and the transparency and the warmth. So then, just a couple supplemental information. These are in response to the latest CDD staff memo that we got. Just asking a little bit about materials. So we have a list of the materials. The materials have actually never changed. This is just kind of for information. Again, kind of probably the most significant is the wood. So it's a cedar, tongue and groove, stained the two colors, lighter and darker, both a warm color. The frame of the building gets expressed. It's actually, a lot of it is actually the true structure of the building. It's galvanized steel, it's painted black. There'll be some composite metal panel that's also black. The standing seam roof is a gray color. And at the ridges of each of the three bays, there's translucent cal wall material, which lets a lot of daylight into those three spaces. And the last thing is a question in the CDD memo was about providing electricity for potential events in the space, because we've always imagined that you could have a lot of activity and sponsor events right in the middle of that space. So we're actually showing in these little red dots, both on the buildings and in one of the landscape islands, electrical outlets so that you could have performances or other kinds of activities. And this elevation shows, again, those locations. This is, we'll just end on a slide looking again at that northwest corner. You can see how the glass wraps both the east and west sides and comes right around the corner, and how it connects to the park in the distance.
Includes the W presentation. These are the continuing staff review items, documenting how we're addressing each one. And again, if it's the board were to approve the project, we'd be eager to move forward to construction, and hope that none of these would stand in the way of getting a building permit.
Okay, thank you. Board members, questions, comments? Nico?
Yeah, it looks great. What What effect does the nanowall have on like energy efficiency or usage? Because I mean, it looks really useful and functional, but I could also imagine it just making costs for heating and cooling a lot more expensive.
The nanowall itself is all insulated glass, so the glass itself is the same as it would have been if it was storefront. The operability of it, the tenants are going to have to sort of decide when to open and close it. They're probably not going to open it on the hottest days of the year when you're going to be using air conditioning. It's going to have to be days when you wouldn't be sort of using either a lot of heat or a lot of air conditioning, sort of those shoulder seasons. So you'd keep the impact on the energy use minimal.
Other questions, comments? Hugh, you?
I guess I'm impressed that through this sort of incremental design enrichment and change, we've ended up with something that's really going to be quite an asset to the overall project. So I'm skeptical when it started, but I'm no longer skeptical.
Anyone else? Mary?
I just want to add my positive endorsement of the design. I think you've done a great job. I think he was right. It's going to really bring the place alive. So congratulations.
Yeah. Steve?
I agree with the others. I guess just one little technical question, and perhaps I ask it out of ignorance. I mean, but red cedar, I've seen in so many instances that red cedar over time, exposed to the elements, turns kind of black. It doesn't, or the visual effect, it changes, and not for the better. Is there some way of sealing it or finishing it to prevent that?
You actually need to make sure you have kind of an antimicrobial additive to the stain, because the black is actually mold.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. The other thing is there's actually a lot of maintenance that you need to do.
Yeah.
And DIFCO's committed to keeping these buildings up and keeping that appearance.
Yeah. Okay, we'll check on them every year.
Other comments? I like it a lot, and I think actually being able to see the interior staircase is really nice. It's very good. So are we prepared to go forward at this point? Do we need to refer to the gross square footage again, or is that just for?
I think it's just as a part of the design review, you're approving the gross floor area as it's been presented in the revised appendix.
All right, so the motion to approve the final plans for Parcel W, subject to ongoing review with CDD, and especially with regard to the comments made in their most recent memo and the comments made this evening, and acknowledging that the gross floor area, as most recently amended, is accurate.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? It's unanimous again. Thank you very much.
One point of information, I think if I could ask for a vote on the Appendix 1 revisions, or Jeff, if you tell me if we need a separate vote on that.
It's the same. It's the same appendix, I believe, as in all the others. So it's already been. I think it's already been approved by the board, maybe twice this evening. You can approve it again.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you all. We have nothing else for this evening.
I guess I'd like to say one thing, to thank our chair for 4 years of stellar.
Thank you for your comment on that. I go crazy. And it's like,
No, it's so obvious to the eye.